All right. We are back for season 2, baby. I'm so excited. Pooja, are you excited to be here with me?
I am so excited to be here.
We have been trying to do this for a while, but because of many micro and macro and systemic things, we have not been able to find the time to connect until now. But I am so excited that you are kicking us off in 2024 with this very first season 2 episode of Extra Shot.
Well, I am so thrilled to be here. And I also think that, it's even kind of like the scheduling back and forth is just such a nice kind of like real self-care um learning, right? Because it's all about being honest about your capacity and what
Yes.
you have going on. And even for us, I feel like we were really kind of transparent over email of kind of like, oh, this is going to be a good week. Oh no, that's not going to be a very good week. And so I'm just thrilled to be here with you and have this time together.
I mean, I actually loved, I feel like you were really living the values you espouse in your book because you were very good at setting boundaries. You were like, this time is going to be difficult for me. And then, I think you shared this on Instagram and publicly. You had kind of a big health journey this year as well that was really unexpected. So my first question is like, how are you? Where are you in life right now? Like, how are you doing?
Yes. So they don't tell you about what a book launch will be like. It's very humbling. I'm a psychiatrist. I take care of patients. I'm a quote unquote an expert on mental health, and I wrote this book called Real Self Care. And the book launch really burnt me out. I think because the first time you're going through it, it's just so many new requests and so many more demands on your time, and you haven't learned yet your own system. And so I'm doing a lot better now. I'm about, I guess, 9 months out, and I've come to understand sort of the lay of the land now, and what things are energizing and what things are energy depleting. And so I have a better understanding of kind of how to parse out my time. But what I talk about in Real Self-Care is that it's not something that you ever stop doing in every new season of your life, whether it's a new career role, a transition, a baby, a parent that gets sick, right? All these different things, you're just kind of like relearning. It gets easier each
Yeah.
time. Like I knew much faster than in the past that like, oh whoa, I need to slow down.
Yeah.
But it's still always like you're kind of on this journey.
I so hear you. I mean, so I read this book after I had gotten back from, I took a big break from touring in the summer. So my book came out in February. I was
Yep.
everywhere. My MO was that I said no to nothing because
Right.
I was like,
Right.
I
Well,
got to
that
do
was your whole book.
everything. Exactly. My book is my first book. This is so exciting. I said yes to everything that was asked of me. I did Facebook Lives at midnight my time because everybody on the East Coast was like
Oh
just getting home
gosh.
from work.
Wow.
I did 3 trips to the US in like a 2-month period from where I live in Scotland, some with my kids, some without. I mean, I really absolutely like burnt the candle on both ends. And then I come home and I read Real Self-Care and I'm like, I have been doing this all wrong. No number of bubble baths in the world is going to help me be better at doing things. And I found your book really challenging in an amazing way because it challenged a lot of what I thought I was just, I kind of see myself, and I think a lot of my friends do too. I'm like the infinite resource, right? Like
Mm.
if I'm managing everybody, my time, my resource that I'm putting out in the world, that's just going to keep going. I'm going to push myself as hard as I can. And your book made me stop and think about what are the long-term effects of that? Why am I doing that? Maybe I should stop doing that. So I read it at an excellent time when I was like coming down from book tour and being like, hold up, maybe I should take a little break for a little while. So I really appreciated how it came to me. So I first heard about you via Jessica Gross's writing. I know that you know her. You were often quoted in her pieces in the New York Times Parenting. And then I thought that her book, Screaming into the Void, The Unsustainability of American Motherhood, could almost be read as a companion to your book in a lot of ways. And really what you both did so exceptionally well is kind of call attention to the problem, and you provide some amazing solutions. So now the book has been out in the world. You've met tons of people. Are you feeling like people are taking in this message? Do you think we are moving forwards around this issue, or are we moving backwards?
Yeah. Great question. And I think I have a couple thoughts. So one is that when I wrote Real Self-Care, it kind of was a two-part thesis. One, to sort of really unpack the wellness industry, which is like, in 2022, the wellness industry was a $5.3 trillion industry. And really to kind of call out that, like, you know, you can't meditate your way out of a 40-hour work week without childcare. Like, that's not how wellness is supposed to work, but that's what we've been sold, right? And it's, at best it's condescending, and at worst it's, manipulative and predatory at times. But I wanted to go further than that because I am a psychiatrist and I do take care of patients. And, I have a understanding from a clinical standpoint and a research standpoint of like, well, then what do we do instead? Because I think right now, in the conversation, there is a lot of cynicism and a lot of kind of like, okay, well, it's just all a shit show, so I'm just going to throw up my hands. And, and that's not actually helpful either, because the reality is, in the same way that we know study after study shows that, like, exercise is probably, and I feel like the word exercise is kind of triggering, especially to my patients and to me. Who has time to exercise? Moving your body, moving your body, like study after study, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, is universally so important for better health outcomes. There's actually similar things when it comes to mental health. The quality of your friendships and your relationships, having actual, real, authentic connection. So we see that in the research, but then it's sort of like, okay, but then how do you actually do that? And that's what real self-care is. And that's why there's 4 principles. They're not steps, they're principles. So it's boundaries, compassion, values, power. Boundaries, compassion, values, power. And it is kind of abstract because my whole thesis is like, you can never tell somebody, you can't prescribe somebody their real self-care. Like, the thing that's going to be real self-care for me is going to be different than what is real self-care for you, Alisha, and for every single listener. So you have to work through the principles, and that's internal. And it's not as easy as just like going to Target and buying, a pretty plant that looks nice. Although I love going to Target and buying
sometimes that does feel nice for the short term.
It's not, and I'm not trying to, I have, as I've been on tour and talking about the book, a lot of times people are like, well, Pooja, but like, I really like yoga. I really like meditation. I really like my fancy face cream. And I'm not saying that those are wrong or bad. What I'm saying is that you have to have right size expectations. Like, that bubble bath is not going to fix the systemic problems in our country. If you need it as an escape, great, but just know that that's what it is.
I mean, I think that there's also this real feeling of kind of guilt and shame, and like you've done something wrong, right? If you buy in to one of these solutions and the plant from Target doesn't make you feel better and it doesn't fix your problems, and that being really self-directed. And I think one thing your book and so many of these discussions are opening up is that actually we're not the screwed up ones because we don't feel great when we buy a plant and that just solves all of our problems, right? I mean, are you hearing that kind of almost consciousness raising as you go out and talk about the book on tour?
Yes, I am. And, one of the reasons that I decided to write a book, because I do still see patients. I have a private practice, and but I can only impact so many people individually. And I've learned in my own journey that in order to take care of my mental health, I can't see patients 5 days a week because I burn out, right? So writing a book allows me to kind of get this message across. And I do think it's really resonating, from what I'm seeing from the media requests that I'm getting. I got to go on the Ezra Klein show and chat with Tressie, which was like, oh my gosh, I was totally fangirling. I think we're ready to kind of dive deeper, to go a layer deeper into commodified wellness, and to, like, the whole thing with real self-care is that we do have agency. Like, no, we can't fix everything. Yes, change always takes much longer than we want it to. And 2 things are true at once. You can set boundaries in your life. You can have hard conversations. You can actually think deeply about, okay, what really matters to me? And how do I rearrange my schedule to have more time on the things and the people and the relationships and the activities that align with my values?
Do you see mostly kind of your audiences that have been coming out? And I've, been following you on Instagram, so I know you've been everywhere and had loads of people. Is it mostly millennial women who I am elder millennial at least? Are you seeing like older people, Gen Zs? Like, what's the kind of, does this book hit the same? Because it is so, everything in here, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And I'm wondering if people younger and older than me by a significant degree are responding to it in the same way.
Yeah, that's been really surprising, a nice surprise for me, because I also am a geriatric millennium. I'm gonna be 40 later this month or in December. Um and my patients are all women and are pregnant postpartum because I'm a perinatal psychiatrist. So yeah, it's like that was my audience prior to the book. And so a lot of the clinical stories are that kind of cohort. But there's been a few like TikTok book talk people that have shared the book. And so I am starting to see like a Gen Z, a younger audience. And it is really interesting because I think they are so much more hungry for like almost like didactic sort of mental health, like really like kind of like literacy on some of these topics of like what actually is a boundary, like what actually is compassion, what does it look like. I think from a millennial standpoint, I think all of us, not that all millennials are parents, but like I think we have more systemic outrage because we're kind of like living that I think somebody called it the panini generation. We're like living that, whereas Gen Z and younger millennials haven't quite hit that spot yet. So they don't necessarily, I mean, they're there with climate change for sure and climate justice, but not with the caregiving crisis yet.
Yeah.
And then the other really cool thing is that I've probably gotten 20 to 30 like emails from men who have been like, I know I'm not in your demographic, like I'm a white male boomer, but I read your book and I really enjoyed it, and I got a lot of gems from it, and so that's been really nice too. Yeah, because I wasn't expecting that. There, when I did my event in New York with Vivi, it was at Vivi in Manhattan. There was a guy who his wife had bought a ticket, but she got stuck at work late. So he came instead, and they had 2 young kids. And at the end, at the book signing, he was like, Pooja, I'm so glad that I was the one that showed up, because I just felt like I learned so much about what she was going through. And it was actually it was better for me to be here and get this message. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that conversation is going to stay with me forever. Right. Like it's just,
now I'm wondering, was this like a brilliant plan on her part? She was like, oh, I'm working late. How can you go instead of me?
Right.
That's genius.
Super smart.
However it worked out. No, but that's really beautiful, actually, that it's like reaching across so many different audiences, which is, I guess, the nice thing about writing a book is that you never know whose hands it's going to end up in. So you said that you worked with moms. I know your practice is around mothers. You became a mom fairly recently. You have a little kid. Do you feel like that changed your perspective on these issues after becoming a mom? Or maybe you were better prepared than all the rest of us because you knew so many moms. You were like, oh, this is going to be hard.
So I think 2 things. One, I think it radicalized me even more. Like it made me even more enraged that everything I say in the book is like, I want to scream it even louder. And I was better prepared. I was able to take a lot of preventative steps that I knew because I had been practicing for 6 or 7 years and knew all the evidence-based strategies that you could put in place to minimize the chance of postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. And being somebody who previously had struggled with depression and anxiety, I knew that I was high risk. So, I went back on an SSRI. I was able to afford getting a postpartum doula so that we were able to get more sleep. And obviously privilege plays a role in that, being able to afford it, and having the education to be able to make that happen, but also real self-care, like setting the boundaries and saying to my partner, like, no, we are going to start paying for childcare, like from day 1, even though he had a paternity leave. Right. And that was kind of like a line in the sand. So all of that for sure helped, but I think it was a little bit of a blessing and a curse because I knew all the bad things.
No one's coming to
And
talk to you about how great it is, right? Right. That's
right,
not why they
right,
found themselves in your office.
right, right. I mean, I hear the great things once people get better, which people do, so that's the good news. But like most doctors, I was probably preparing for the worst. But I think even knowing everything that I did, just the demands on your brain of especially like being a mom that works outside the home.
Mm-hmm.
Like this phase that I'm in now where my son he's almost a year and a half. So he's a toddler.
Yeah.
And my career now is, I see patients, but I'm also like traveling. I didn't used to travel for work. I'm doing speaking engagements and consulting, and it's hard. And I'm having to kind of try and figure out, okay, like what pieces of this do I want? What works? What doesn't? And there's no easy answers. Emily Oster says there's no secret option C. And right, like there's no secret option C. There's just, pros and cons, and you always have to make sacrifices
Yeah.
of whether that is financially or time wise, or right. Like there's no magic
Yeah.
secret bullet.
I have a WhatsApp group with 3 of my closest friends, all our moms, all work outside of the house, all very, very busy and demanding careers. And a lot of that WhatsApp group is us being like, okay, so here's the situation. I have, my youngest child's first day of school is this day, but there's this meeting that I want to go to or that I need to go to in
Yep.
North Carolina, but there's also this retreat I want to go to in South Carolina. And all of these things are happening within a 24-hour period. What do I do? And oftentimes it's just, because you're right, there is never one like, here is the perfect answer to completely optimize your schedule. It's like, this sucks. Something's going to have to give. What's the thing that you feel like you really want / need to be out right now? And also just reminding each other that it's normal that we have to make choices and prioritize. And, I don't know if my mom was doing that with her friends. I'm sure she was not. My mom worked full time when I was a kid. And my dad, is an incredible man, but did not help, did not change a diaper, did not do any childcare. And I don't know that she had that kind of support from her peers to be like, hey, this is really hard and we're all in this together. And I mean, I certainly rely on that a lot. I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I totally agree. I think we are having these conversations in our text threads, in our friend groups. And I think it's kind of like it's validating, it's normalizing that you have to choose. That the fact that you have to choose doesn't mean that you've made a wrong decision somewhere. It's just because we all have such full lives. I always like to reframe it to my patients and to myself as kind of like, these are actually good problems to have. Like, what a full life that I have built for myself, that these are all of the options in front of me.
What a nice way to think about it. I love that. I'm going to steal that in my WhatsApp
yes,
group.
please do.
You all will be hearing this in my WhatsApp groups soon. So I kept coming back to this question after I finished and I did actually send them all your book when I read it. I was like, oh my God, guys, everybody has to read this. I was thinking, so my kids are 12 now. They are becoming aware of the world. They certainly have much more fluency in the type of language around, they understand more or less what a boundary is in a way that I did not at 12 years old. Right.
Yeah.
But how do or what would your advice be for parents thinking about how to keep your children from falling into this trap of wellness and kind of quick fix solutions? How do we preempt this basically? Like, so our kids don't have to read this book because they're already doing all of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, everybody's kids should read this book and continue buying it forever and ever and ever. But
thank you.
In addition to that,
yeah, I have a couple thoughts there. So the first thing that I would say is, one, recognize that your kids are already ahead of the game. Like what you said in the beginning of their vocabulary, their language around mental health is already leagues above what you and I had growing up. I see it with my son. We watched Daniel Tiger, which is just like so much there in terms of like describing your feelings and language and right. So they already have a head start. So that's good. Two, from the research shows that modeling is so important. So
Mm,
knowing that each time you make a hard choice for yourself in terms of setting boundaries or in terms of making a decision that's aligned with your values, taking the extra step to explain to your kids, because they're 12, so
mhm.
they can follow that. So to say, okay, well, I had this work opportunity that came up, and then we also had this family event, and it was tough for me, and I made the choice because XYZ is something that's really important to me. So actually, like, taking the time to walk through it with
Yeah.
them is also that helps, because they see you doing it, but then they also then start to have a scaffolding and a framework for how to talk to themselves about future decisions that will come up. And then in the same vein, you can, because they're preteens, so they're probably in sports and activities, and they're kind of like getting to that stage where it's going to be like high school and college and things like that. So they have to
Yes.
make their own hard choices, right? Of
Mhm.
like their own teen version of like, I have a work trip and I have this thing and that thing, because they can't do everything.
Yeah.
So actually really being a generous thought partner with them to help them talk through, okay, well, what is the reason that I want to be on the swim team? Right? Like, what does the swim team mean to me? And what does that art class mean to me? And like kind of like helping them go layers deeper, as opposed to kind of just being like, well, you're just going to do XYZ. And, you know, I grew up in a typical Asian immigrant family where it was just like, well, just do everything. Just do everything, get into an Ivy League college, right? And
Yeah.
um, so I think that's what I would say. So it's a lot of like communicating your own decision making,
Yeah.
and then also helping them through communicating their own as well.
I love that. I
And then
think
I
that's
always like to
so
caveat
important.
this with like, you're always going to make mistakes, and that's a normal part of parenting too.
And also sometimes I have to be like, you both have to do this activity because that's the time I can pick you up from school. And
Yes, right.
that's the only reason you have to do
Yes.
the same thing on the same day.
Yeah.
That
Right.
also happens in
But
this
I
house.
think that that's part of modeling too, right? That's showing that you as their mom are also a person and a human being that has your own activities and interests and work, and not everything revolves around them.
Pooja, I could talk to you all year, but we can't talk all year. I mean, we could actually, but let's not on this podcast. Um, but you are kicking us off in 2024. So I want to finish up with some of your like top 2024 non-bubble bath related self-care tips. What are the things that you think we should be entering the year with for the people who are listening to this?
Yeah. So my number one tip from real self-care is the pause. So we hear so much about boundaries.
Mm,
I think that there's kind of like a lot of misconceptions about boundaries. For me, a boundary is the pause. It's the space in between when somebody asks you something, when you get an email, when you get a request, and when you respond. So you pause
love it.
and you think, and then you always have three options: yes, no, or negotiate. No always comes with a cost,
Mhm.
right? So we can't pretend that it doesn't come with a cost, but the pause is always accessible. So I would love for folks who are listening to think about where can I incorporate the pause today, right? Just in the micro level of like the next email that comes in, the next ask that comes in, the next time my kid wants something. And then even thinking about it on a macro level for your year, for 2024, like what is something, a bigger life decision that you feel like maybe there's some level of urgency, or I need to know, or can I give myself the space of the pause to take the time to reflect internally and think about what's most important to you, and what really feels authentic for you in making that decision?
That is such a brilliant tip. It's like that flashing red badge on my emails or my messages, and the feeling, the compulsion almost to
Yes.
respond right away, and just not even saying no to things, but actually just taking a moment, taking a breath. What an amazing way to start the year. Everybody go out and buy real self-care, crystals, cleanses, and bubble baths not included. Pooja, this has been amazing. I cannot wait to see what brilliant gems you drop on us next. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Alisha, for having me. This was such a pleasure.